And among those getting slammed by budget cuts in Sacramento, the pursuit of justice. How the courts are shutting down in Los Angeles County and elsewhere. And what can be done to keep the courthouse doors open to all. Good evening. In a moment, a voter's guide to keeping track of money in politics and an Earth Day assessment of the Southern California coastal waters. But first, Los Angeles County announced this week it plans on closing more courtrooms, laying off more court employees, belt-tightening, or is this simply a slow destruction of an institution? With us now is Attorney Paula Keisler, the co-chair of the California Open Courts Coalition, and Sharon Mason is a Los Angeles County Superior Court clerk. Together, they're representing the group Save LA Courts. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with you, Ms. Mason. There are those who will argue, yes, the state of California doesn't have the money. We see it in education. We see it in higher education. We see it in law enforcement. Why shouldn't the institution of justice be spared?
Well, the institution has taken its share of cuts. We've taken cuts of over $600 million over the last couple of years. And the effect that we have on the general public can be devastating. We affect people's child custody, probate matters, criminal matters, the juvenile justice system. And with shutting down those courtrooms and some of those services that are provided to people, they're looking at not being able to get divorced in a matter of 6 months to a year, but now 2 or 3 years, or somebody getting through a probate situation, you know, with it taking 2 or 3 years longer.
How much money are we talking about?
Well, right now we're dealing with a $48 million cut with possibly many more on the table.
What have you cut before this?
There were many cuts. There were layoffs within the court system, 329 people.
It's $48 million now. How much was it before?
Well, it went in stages. It's a total of over $600 million that we've taken over the last couple of years.
That's remarkable. Counselor, let me ask you the question.
Sure.
Why should we care?
Well, you need to care because an effective court system, a place that people can pay their traffic tickets, a place that people can get divorced, a place that people who need temporary restraining orders to have custody of their children can go to and have access to that's open, affordable, and accessible is critical. And people don't appreciate the court system until it's not there to serve them. And we are at great risk right now, literally, of the courtrooms closing their doors to litigants. And the impact of that, the inability of someone to be able to go into court and civilly resolve their disputes, could be devastating on our community.
How so? Well,
if you think about it, if a landlord wants to remove a tenant from his property who's overstayed his welcome or her welcome and goes to court to get an unlawful detainer action, if the courthouse doesn't have the ability to do that for 6, 8, 9 months and those people are staying in an apartment and not paying rent, don't think that landlord might not take the law into his or her own hands and remove that tenant physically. That is a real distinct possibility if they can't use the courts in the way they're designed to be set.
How does this impact the criminal justice system?
Well, interestingly, the criminal justice system in part is protected because there's going to be dollars that otherwise come out of the civil courts where share is that get plowed into the criminal courts. But those resources themselves are being hammered. We just closed and will close on June 30th, 24 criminal courtrooms, 24 civil courts, 24 criminal courts are going to close. That's going to increase the backlog of prisoners trying to have their cases heard, and it's going to substantially impact the courtrooms whose doors remain open.
Does that have any impact on the governor's realignment program?
Well, it will substantially impact the governor's realignment program because the ability of the courts
Which we should explain. That's realigning the institution, the penal institution in California, so there's greater responsibility at the county level.
Right, and to minimize overcrowding that's happening in the prison systems because of court budget cuts that have happened in the prison systems. So when we sit here today and we talk about where do you cut dollars, I mean, we have a limited amount of resources. That's the bottom line. Is it health care? Is it education? Is it the public safety, or is it the courts? The bottom line is the courts have taken, as Cher said, a 30% hit over the last 4 years. It cannot sustain another dollar. In fact, it needs money back into the system to keep doors open.
Go ahead, but these cuts that you're talking about are based on the assumption that the ballot measure that the governor wants to put on the ballot that would raise revenue fails. Is that correct, or is this irrespective of whether or not there's a vote in November?
This is irrespective. We are taking the cuts now. The additional layoffs that we're going to suffer are going to happen before the end of summer. The court closures are going to happen before the end of summer. And you're talking about an effect on the general public that can be devastating. Just the other day in the courthouse, walking around the hallways, there's a woman with a huge black eye. She's down there to try and get a restraining order. She's in a domestic violence situation. And when you get down to that office, there are 4 people working a counter and probably 60 people in line. She probably will not even get taken care of on that same day and have to come back subsequent visits to try and get her situation handled. And that's just one example of how it's going to dramatically affect the general public trying to get things accomplished.
Does this drive the privatization of the judiciary? When people sign off saying they will go to arbitration if there's a problem with this company or whatever you're doing?
I'll answer it this way. Those people who can afford to have justice will likely leave the court system. They'll likely go to other out-of-court arbitrators or mediators to get their disputes resolved. But that doesn't help 99% of our citizens who need an operating courthouse to pay their traffic tickets or deal with their family disputes. Those individuals will not have justice. Those who can afford justice will pay for that, but that's not what we need in this country.
Well, is justice not a priority in Sacramento?
It's a good question. First of all, understand that although I'm an attorney, my hat here is as a co-chair of the Open Courts Coalition. And what we recognize is that there is no real stakeholder who's going to support the funding of the court system. The judges, once they become judges, are no longer advocates. And so the legal community is basically stepping up for the court to help the legislators understand how important it is that we fund our justice system. And so we have a historic low of attorneys who are legislators and therefore don't have necessarily an appreciation for the value the court system brings in California.
Your fear that that appreciation will come too late?
I fear that they need to hear us now. Literally, we're on the precipice, really, of disaster. And before the hospital, if you want to use that analogy, closes and no more health care is provided, we need to stop the cuts. We need to restore some funding, or the results will really, I don't underestimate it when I say devastating.
What's your website?
Well, the website for the Open Courts Coalition really doesn't exist, but if you go online and type in Stand Up for Justice, Stand Up for Justice, you will see an amazing array of political and legal luminaries, bipartisan, who are there telling the legislators and the community why supporting our court system is so critical.
And you're part of the Save LA Courts, which
Yes.
is a union group as well, part of organized labor, because
Yes.
you're represented as well.
Yes.
Paul Keisel from the
Open Courts Coalition.
Open Courts Coalition. Thank you very much for joining us, both of you.